Welcome to the UI part of this crash course. This part of the crash course is going to show you how to build a responsive UI using Chakra and getting it ready to be able to use with Clerk and Hazura. The good news is, if you decide to take this crash course, but you don't want to use Clerk or Hazura and you want to use something else, this code is completely agnostic, which means that you could just edit it and add in your own backend or own client side, and you'll be able to handle it. So you're probably asking, what are you going to be building? Well, let's take a look. So here we are in the course. This is what you're going to be building. You're going to have this section down here, which has to-dos, which someone can check off, and they will disappear as they get checked off. If they click this down arrow, they can add a new note here and say, hello, new notes, and then a note in here. They click this button and it gets propagated to the database, but in our example, if we click it, nothing will actually happen and we'll get back to this screen. Then we have this finished to-do section here, which is a table which tells a user exactly what they've done. They can see the title of the note itself, and then when it was completed. Then, on top of that, if you render this down into a slightly smaller screen, so here we have it quite big, as you slowly reduce it down, you can see that the UI does change, and we have some sort of drop down here, and as you get smaller, everything shrinks down, so it's completely responsive, and that includes the table section too. When you go to finish to-dos, it does shrink down, and dependent on how small you get, you'll get a scroll bar to finish off. So it's completely responsive. This is what we're going to be building today. So let's get into the code. So the first thing before we do literally anything is that we need to install the ChakraUI packages. Now I'm going to use this command right here, but if you're using npm, feel free to do it here. I'm using a create next app, which is just npx create next app, and that's how I'm going to be following this. So go ahead, copy this, minimize your project, launch the terminal, and paste this in. Once it has finished installing, we'll come back into this code and we'll start talking about any other packages we might need. So now that's installed, we do need one more package, and that's the React icons package. So we can do yarn add React icons, and that will add any icons that we might need as we continue through this project. So if you look at your package JSON now, it should look fairly light and have these dependencies here. Should have ChakraUI React, emotion styled, frame emotion, next, React DOM, and React icons, and then ESLint as the dev dependencies if you're using Next 11, which I am in this example. So now we have this, we need to talk about how this works in general. So we're going to have components here, and these components are going to be built of three different sections. We're going to have one, which is the checkbox, which is the to-do section at the bottom where you click it and the checkbox handles some stuff. We're going to have a layout section, which is going to handle the whole layout of the pages. And we also have the to-do section, which will take some of the other components and add them together. So the smartest thing first would be for us to build out a layout of the page. So let's first start by creating a few new folders and also closing out our terminal. So the first folder we need to create is called components. And then, as I stated, we need three sections here. So we're going to have checkbox. We're going to have to do. And finally, we're going to have layout. Now, each one of these is going to contain something that we need to use. So, for example, in the layout, we're going to have a few different JavaScript files. One, we're going to have a page shell, which essentially houses everything inside of it. Then we're going to have a nav menu, nav items. We're going to have a mobile hamburger menu, and then we're going to have something called use mobile menu state. And that's just going to manage the state of if someone happens to be on maybe an iPad or a small tablet. If they were to rotate our app and start using it landscape, we want them to be able to experience the correct version. So if it's on landscape, you may want to display the desktop version versus the mobile version, depending on the size of the screen. So that's enough talking for me. I've kind of built out this with a good structure in mind, and I think it will give you a good introduction to how powerful ChakraUI is. So we're going to do a side-by-side for the most part while we build this out, so that we can see things update on the screen as we go. So I'm going to launch this terminal, and then we'll meet back with a side-by-side comparison so that we can start coding our project. Now that we have our side-by-side comparison, the most important things that we need to do now is handle the Chakra provider. And if you don't know what a Chakra provider is, it's a way of telling the application we are going to use ChakraUI throughout this application. And I also want you to reset the styles, which is something that can cause frustration if you use another UI framework. And it could cause things to not look what they should look like because of the way different browsers render things. So to begin, we're going to delete this style sheet and we're going to import Chakra provider. And that's going to come from at Chakra-UI/React. And then all we have to do is wrap this section here in our provider. So we can do that by doing a return statement and saying return Chakra provider. And then we can do component dot page props. And then that is all we need to do. Now we're going to be using ChakraUI everywhere on screen, and you can see that some of the styles may have changed immediately on screen. So now we want to start building the layout to our pages. So we're going to do a new file here, and we're going to call it pageshell.js. Now this pageshell.js is going to do some interesting things. It's going to consume a bunch of other components, and it's also going to wrap our whole application so that we can use it everywhere and styles stay consistent. So first, let me do an export const page shell, and we're going to take in children, and we're going to then do some things inside of here. So what the children are doing here is essentially we're basically taking any kind of thing that gets passed into this page is going to be displayed through this page. So you can imagine us, if we wanted to, we could pass this whole page in and it would display all styles that are attached to it. So if I hit save, what I can do is at the top import a box from Chakra. And if you don't know what a box is, you can imagine it as a div. It's essentially a div that you can extend however you want. So what I'm going to do here is create a box, and I'm going to set it as the main. And then I'm going to add padding to the top and bottom. And the way you do that in ChakraUI is you type py, and then you can add in a number here. So we're going to do 8, which is not 8 rem or 8 pixels. It's a arbitrary number between 0 and 8. So in this example, 8 is equal to 2 rem. And then we're also going to add flex here, and I'm going to set the flex to 1. Then inside of here, this is where we're going to contain everything. So we can add from our box here something called container. Now what container does is essentially center up everything on screen and contain it, make it responsive and fluid. And we can give it a max width here. So if you type max W, we're going to set this to 7XL, which probably sounds like a random set of numbers here, but 7XL is essentially a way of saying, hey, don't make it any bigger than a particular width, even if the screen is ginormous. So if you're viewing this on a 49-inch ultra-wide monitor, it's going to look the same as probably a 1080p monitor. It's going to look the same styled. It's going to take up the same amount of space. It's not going to get crazy ginormous, which is perfect for what we want. We don't want this to just keep stretching and stretching and stretching across the screen. So now I have this container. What I can do is pass in another box here, and we'll give it a background of white. And then we'll give it a padding of 6. And then we'll also make the edges rounded so that someone can tell the difference. And then we'll add a little shadow here. We'll just say shadow of base, which is just the base shadow, very light, nothing too heady. And then what I can do is pass in the children here. So now I have this section here. We could wrap this whole page up in it. But to do that, we need to actually return the data on the screen. We can't just say, hey, here's some cool stuff. We need to return this. So we can just wrap this in a return. And then we're ready to use it. But what you've noticed is nothing has changed on this side of the screen. And that's because we're not using this component yet in our project. So to do that, go to your app.js. So what we can do is to import page shell from /components/layout/page shell, and hit save. Nothing will change yet, but what we're going to do is wrap everything inside our provider in this page shell. So you can just do page shell, and then take this and paste it in here, and hit save. And now you can see something's kind of changed, but not really. Like everything kind of shifted down a little bit, but the contents is still kind of the same. Nothing's really changed, but that's because we only have a really basic page shell here. We're just putting everything inside a white, padded, rounded, shadow-based, and everything inside of it is our children. And that's okay. So what we can do now is make some more changes. So what I want to do is add flex to the whole project. So we can just do flex and make sure we import that at the top. And say, I want to use flex here. And I want to use the direction equal to column. I want the background here to be gray. And what's cool about ChakraUI is you can set the gray amount. So I'm going to use gray 100 here. And then the height needs to be equal to 100% of the view height. And then we can take this flex here and drop it underneath our box here. Hit save and see nothing is really changed, but you can kind of see if you look real hard, there's some boxing going on here. You can see there's a light shadow around the edges. Then I want to do some more changes as well. So I want to do another flex here, and we want to align this equal to center. And we're going to have a background here of blue 600. So it's going to be kind of like a dark blue color. We want the color of the text to be white. And we're going to do padding on each side, left and right, equal to 6. And then we're going to have a minimum height here. And we're going to set that to 16. Now this section here is actually going to be separate from our section below. And this is going to be where our header is contained. So I'm going to add one more section here, and then we need to build out a few more components. So what we can do is do flex justify equal to space between. And the space between, and then we're going to align it in the center, and we're going to say the width is the full length. So you can do width equals full. And then inside of here will be our nav bar. But right now we don't have anything. So if I hit save, nothing's going to change over here. But now we can start building out sections. So the next section that I want to build is going to be the nav item section. And the nav item section is essentially going to be a difference between a desktop item and a mobile item. And each one is going to be essentially the same idea, but with some slight changes depending on if you're using desktop or mobile. So on the left-hand side in your layout, we're going to create something called navitem.js. Now this navitem.js is going to use NextRouter to handle moving between pages, and we're also going to have something called HStack, which you haven't seen yet. You've seen a box, but you haven't seen an HStack. And HStack is a way of essentially telling you, I want to stack these horizontally. And HStack gives you the ability to stack them horizontally, so one next to each other, really easily without having to worry too much about how it's handled in the backend. It just works perfectly each time. So we're going to have two variables here. We're going to have one called const desktop nav item, and that seems fairly obvious, but that's going to be anything that's on our desktop version. And then we're also going to have another const, and this one's going to be called mobile nav item, and it's going to do anything that's on a mobile device. So what do we do for a desktop nav? So first we need const router, which is set to use router. And if you've never used NextRouter before, we should import it at the top so that it works. Use router is a way of telling the application where it should go. Should it be going to this page? And we can also pass in things like history. We can also return it to old pages. It's essentially a way of navigating around a Next.js application. And so we're going to be using that to handle clicks and things like that. Talking about clicks, we're going to need some way to handle a click when someone presses the button. So we're going to do handle click equal to E for the event. And we're going to say e.prevent default router.push and then href. So essentially what we're doing here is telling it, hey, we want you, when you click this button, to push the URL that we have in this item. So now we have the handle click part done. We need to handle the stack and everything else that comes along with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to be taking in three properties here. We're going to take an icon, a label, and href. Now these are going to come from something called the nav menu that we're going to build immediately after this. So you can imagine that we're going to pass in these three properties, and they're going to tell it where it should go, what it should be labeled, and then an icon to go along with it. Then we're going to return, and inside of this return is where we're going to do the UI part. So we're going to use that HStack as we discussed, and we're going to say HStack as equal to an A. So essentially what we're telling it is each HStack here is going to be an A, which is a link. We're going to say href is equal to href. We're going to say on click, we want to equal to handle click, which essentially overrides the usual like href click and uses the router instead of a regular link. But we need this to actually show up as a link in the item. Then we're going to use something called spacing here. And spacing essentially just adds a bit of padding to each side. And then we're going to add some extra padding around the whole item versus each HStack available. And that's going to be on the X-axis and the Y-axis. Then I want to make it nice and rounded, so we'll do a medium round here. And then I'm going to do some transitions, and the transitions are going to be all and then 0.2 seconds. And we're going to say color is equal to white. But then when they hover on it, so when you're hovering, we want to change the background a little bit. So we'll do BG, so for background, set to white alpha 200. And then inside of the actual HStack itself, we're going to do an icon, assuming someone's passing an icon in. We'll put a box and say area hidden font size equals MD, so for medium font, and we'll return the icon itself. Then underneath this, we'll do another box, and we'll do font weight is equal to semi-bold, and we'll put our label in here. So we'll do label. Now this is all well and good, but you can't really tell what it is right now. So if we hit save, nothing really happens, right? So first let's do an export here and do export const nav item equal to desktop, and we'll set this to the desktop nav item. And we'll hit save for now. And what we'll do is we'll test this out and come back and build this second one that we'll be able to see real time. So we need a nav menu. So the way that the nav menu is going to work is we're going to create a new file here called nav menu. So our nav menu is essentially going to be taking something from this nav item here and displaying it depending on if they're using a desktop or a mobile device. So we can do import box flex and HStack, which we've seen a few times, and say from ChakraUI /React. We're also going to import an icon here called high view grid, and that comes from React -icons /hi, so that's the hi section. And then we're going to import our nav item from our component section, which we can just do ./nav item, and we can hit save. And now we can use all of these in our code. So we're going to only be doing the desktop version here. So we can do const desktop nav menu equal to a function here that's going to automatically return, and we're going to say HStack spacing is equal to 3, flex is equal to 1, display is equal to base, and we're going to set the base to none, and LG set to flex. Now let me explain what that does before we continue on. So what we're doing here is we're telling ChakraUI, hey, when someone navigates to this page, if they're on a tiny screen, don't display this section because we don't want them to see it. So imagine that we have this desktop version and a mobile version. In the mobile version, we'll say, hey, by default, we want this shown, but if it's on a bigger screen, don't show this to people. And that's how we're going to be able to display different sizes and make it responsive for the user. So now we have this section. We actually need to do something inside. So we're going to use the nav item that we imported and put nav item dot desktop and set an icon equal to the icon we just imported at the top. So high view grid. We'll set the label to home, and we'll set href equal to /, and then we'll close that out. So now we have a sort of working version here. Then we can do export const nav menu equal to an object, and then we'll export desktop as desktop nav menu and hit save. So now we have this as an option, but we're not really using it yet. As you can see on the screen, nothing has really changed. So we can go to our page shell here and say, I want to import this nav menu. So we do import nav menu from ./nav menu. And we're going to take this nav menu and say, we want to use this inside of this flex here, which is handling where our UI is. So we can just do nav menu dot desktop, and that's it. And if we hit save here, you'll see nothing has changed right now. So if we look at this, nothing is different, no icons, no nothing, and that's because our screen is not big enough. So if I make this full screen, you'll see that this now has appeared and says home. And then if I shrink it back down, it's gone again. But if I make it big again, it's home. Shrink it down, it's gone again. And that's because of that difference in size. So you can see as we make it responsive, it disappears and reappears. So that part is handled through ChakraUI, but it only handles desktop, which is fine and dandy. But what happens if we want to do mobile? So what we need to do is handle how mobile works now. And the way mobile is going to work is we're going to have something called navmenu.mobile, which we just talked about. And we're also going to have something called mobile hamburger menu. And this is going to handle the state. So when someone clicks it, it's going to open, or they're going to close the menu, and it's going to have options for is it open or is it closed. So we can handle all of that on screen and start allowing people to use it. So what I want to do here first is create our mobile nav item that will handle when someone is looking on mobile. Then we'll add it to our nav menu here as an option, and then we'll add it to our page shell, and then we'll handle everything else that comes along with it. So let's start by creating our mobile nav menu and then adding in pieces that we need. So head back to the nav menu, and we're going to add something in here and also fix this icon that was broken because we forgot to wrap this correctly. So the way that this works is on a desktop, you can just do a set like this, and then that will fix that. So let's just make sure that fixed our problem there. Now we actually have an icon that is attached to the home label. So now we have that. Now we can start creating a, instead of just a desktop version, we can have a mobile version. So the way the mobile version is going to work is we're going to essentially have some properties that we're going to pass in. So we'll call this mobile nav menu. I'm going to set it equal to some props. And those props that we're going to pass in is just going to be, is it open? So you can do const is open and say equal to props. So now we have this destructured property that we can essentially use to detect whether or not our hamburger menu is open. So now we can do our return functionality here, and we can say flex, and then say we want this to be hidden if this is not open. So we don't want to show this menu to anybody if it's not open. And then we can say this is as our nav bar. We can say the direction that we want the flex to be in will be a column. We want the BG to be blue 600, which is the same color as this section right here. We're going to say we want it position to be fixed. And then we're going to have a height. And the height is going to be calculated. So what you can do here is do calc and then do 100 of the viewport. I mean the view height, sorry, minus 4M. So we're just basically going to take 4M from the height of this. We're going to put a top on here of 16. We're going to say inset the X equal to 0. And then we're going to Z index this equal to, say, 10. And then we'll make the width full so that it fills the whole screen. So now we have that part. We can then, inside of our flex, we're going to set a box. And with our box, we're going to set a PX, which is padding on the X-axis, equal to 4. And then inside of here is where we'll have our nav items. So for now, we'll just have one nav item dot mobile. And we'll set this to label equals home and href equal to slash, and then we'll close it out. Now you notice that this mobile nav item, we don't actually have that right now. So if we go inside of here, we don't have this as an item. So we can hit save here and we can move on to nav item and handle this section, the mobile nav item section, so that we can handle what happens when a user is in the mobile state. So the way the mobile state's going to work is essential as what we have above. It's very similar in the fact that we're going to be using this router, we're going to be using a click handler, but we're also going to have a few props. So we can take this first and say, I'd like these, and we'll drop them in here. And above that, we'll also do a const here that says, we want to take the label and the href that we're passing in equal to props. And then we're going to return something. And that return here is going to be a box as a link. So as a, we're going to display it equal to block. We're going to have href here of the href that we're passing in. So the link will be whatever link we pass in. The onClick will equal handle onClick, which is the same thing as we had before. And then we'll have a px equal to 3. And we'll also do a py equal to 3. And then we need rounded set to medium. And you can see a lot of this is similar here in the sense that we're going to use the same things. And then we're also going to need font weight. And we'll set the font weight to semi-bold. And then we just need to have the label. So we can do a label here. And the label will be what we pass in through props. And then we need to export this out. So we can call this mobile. And then we'll call this mobile nav item. And that will handle both our desktop and mobile versions. So we can hit save here. And then go back to our nav menu. And we need to also export out our menu here. So we can just say, comma, mobile, nav, menu. So now we have this mobile version. We also have a desktop version. So in our page shell, what we need to do now is essentially pass this in. The problem with that is we don't know whether or not the mobile state is going to be open or closed, right? So if we do this right now and say save, we don't actually know if this is open, closed. We have no way to know if there's a menu here. We don't really know how to sort of say, hey, this is a mobile hamburger menu and this is what we should do. And this is what introduces our file called mobile hamburger menu.js. And inside of here is where we're going to handle the state of the box of our items. So what we can do here is import box and say we want that from ChakraUI. So ChakraUI/React. And then we're also going to import high outline menu and also high X from React icons. And this will give us the ability to have a close icon and also a menu icon. And then we can do something along the lines of export const mobile hamburger menu is equal to the props that we're going to pass in. And those props are going to handle two things. On click, so that we can do something. And also, is it open? And we're going to use props. And you'll remember we've used this is open before. So what we're going to do is return a box with ms equal to -4, a min width equal to, and this depends, on base, we'll say it is going to be 12, but potentially on a larger screen, we want it to be 76 pixels. And that's just to cover those screen sizes between them. And then we're going to have a display none. So that is only going to be on large screens though. So LG is none. So this won't get displayed. And then inside of here is where we can handle two different states. So we can say box as a button. And this is the powerful part of the box in ChakraUI. You can make it be whatever you need it to be and then make it custom. So if you needed this to be, say, a link, you could do that, or a button. You could be just a piece of text, or anything that you really needed. So we're going to use it as a button here. We're going to say on click equals on click. And then we're going to do a padding here equal to 2 and font size equal to extra large. And inside of here is where we're going to have these two different menus. So we're going to have a box again, and then we're going to have area hidden, and then as, and then is open. So if it is open, we want it to be this high X icon. Else, we want it to be the high outline menu. Then we want another one underneath that says box, and it says SR only. And inside of this box, we're going to say is open. And that SR only is for screen reader only. And we're going to say close menu or open menu. So this will allow a screen reader to know exactly what this is for. And then we can make sure to hit save. And then let me word wrap this so we can just talk about it really quickly. So what we're doing here is saying, hey, if it's on a large screen, don't display it. But we want to use this box. And then we want to make a button. And the first button is going to be like the X symbol if it is open. And if it is closed, we want it to be a menu button so that someone will click on it. So that handles the ability to essentially open or close this. And then we need one more piece, and that's the mobile menu state. And that essentially is going to use useEffect to determine whether or not the menu should be there and the actions that we should be using. So we now have this part. So we can go back to our page shell and say, we'd also like one more thing, please. And what we would like is a mobile hamburger menu. And we're going to say on click equal to currently nothing. So we'll just put console log clicked. And then is open is the other part that we need. So we can just say is open. And we'll just say, we'll just set it to true. And then we can close this out and hit save. And then we need to import this at the top as we haven't defined it yet. So we can just do import hamburger menu from /mobile hamburger menu. And as long as I can spell, none is defined. That is correct. So we can go back here. We made a mistake here. None should be in a set of double quotes there. And now you can see that this is here, which doesn't really help us. Like, we're not displaying the menu. We have this like icon here. So we know that our breakpoints are working now. So if I shrink this down and we get it here, you can see the X is there. And if we stretch it out, now we get the home icon. So we're kind of 3/4 of the way there now. And basically our page shell will be complete, but we need to finish off handling this state. So what we can do is create one more file here, and we're going to call it use mobile menu state.js. And inside of here is where we're going to handle basically our state. So we're going to import a few things. We're going to import something called use boolean, and that's going to be one thing, and then use breakpoint value. And this will all make sense in a second. And those are going to come from ChakraUI as well. So we're really utilizing all the tools that ChakraUI has that maybe you haven't seen before. And then we're also going to use useEffect, which is a React piece that allows us to handle the state all the time as we progress. So we can do export const here, use mobile menu state, set it equal to this, which will be our function, and we can say const is menu open, and then actions, and that's going to be equal to use boolean, and then const is mobile breakpoint equal to use breakpoint value, and inside of here base equals true and large equals false. So essentially what we're saying here is it in mobile? Well, all the time yes, unless it's on a large screen, then it's not. Then we could say useEffect. We want to use this to handle our question here of if is mobile breakpoint equal to false, actions dot off, and then comma is mobile breakpoint comma actions. And then we need to return something here. So we're going to do return is menu open dot 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 actions. And if we hit save, put some semicolons in, change this to is menu open and hit save. Now we have this functionality. So what is happening here? Seems like quite a bit going on. So let's just cover it one more time. So we have two things here called use boolean, and essentially this is a way of ChakraUI's essentially checking something. And then we also have this mobile breakpoint. So this mobile breakpoint says, hey, if it's bigger than anything that is a large screen or bigger, this is no longer a mobile menu. And then we have this useEffect that's checking to make sure this breakpoint is true all the time. And then we're returning is the menu and the actions that we could have. So now we have all of these together. If you remember correctly, we have this function here that is open, which sort of matches this one, is menu open. So we kind of having these two properties, right? So if we go back to our page shell here, what we can do is at the top before our return statement, we can say const is menu open, comma toggle, and then equal to use mobile menu state. And then we need to import this in. So we can just say import this from / use mobile menu state. Now what's cool about this is you can actually tell from this name what it is, right? So you can say is menu open. Okay, that's very obvious that it is the menu open. So we can take this and say mobile menu hamburger menu, right? So inside of here we have two things. Is open equals true, and then on click clicked, right? So we can change this to is menu open. So is it open? We can detect that. And then also on click, we can do the action, which is toggle. So if you remember, there was sort of like in our state here, this action. So it's going to action between those two things of open and close. And then finally, we need one more thing, which is this mobile menu actually open? So let's move this from here to above to make it easier for us to follow that this is the hamburger menu and this is the mobile menu. And then say, is open equal to is menu open? And if you remember correctly, in this mobile function too, we had this is open props, and now we're passing that in. If we hit save now you can see that this has changed. If we click it, now you can see that this menu comes along, and if we go bigger, it changes back, and if we go smaller, we have to click the button again, and if we go all the way down, it's still there regardless. And when we get bigger again, bam, back to home. So now we have this essential wrapping of the page, and our layout is complete now. Obviously, what we have in this page here isn't very good, but at least now we have some way of showing the user data in a responsive way, and they can navigate a menu if we had more menu items, which we'll add in the future. So now I hear you cry, what's next? Well, we have a couple more things that we need to do. First, we need to create a way for a user to essentially check an item off the list. We need them to be able to delete a to-do if they want. We need ability to show as many to-dos as possible. We need to delete, complete, add, and also a way to manage the state. And we also need to show a completed to-do if they navigate to that page that we currently don't have. So now the layout is complete. I think the best option now is to have our to-dos done. So the way to-dos are going to work is we're essentially going to pass in a bunch of different to-dos, and those to-dos are going to be a button that is essentially a checkbox at the same time. Now, we want to handle button checkboxes in a particular way using some features of ChakraUI. So if we close all of this out for now, and we say, I would like to see the checkbox here, let's create our first file that's going to be called checkbox.js. And we also need one more, which is checkbox box.js. Sounds very complicated, but this box here is going to just be a way of us displaying different checked options. So let's work on our checkbox box first. So what we're going to do is import box again, and that's going to come from ChakraUI/box. And we're going to say export const checkbox box equals props. And we're going to equal that to what we return in here. So we're going to return a box. And if someone hovers over it, we want the cursor to be a pointer. We want a transition, which is going to make it look nice and pretty for someone. We want all of our transitions to happen in 2 seconds. And then underscore focus means when it's in focus. We want the shadow to be an outline. And then if it's checked, and we want the background to be a gray 50, and then the border color, so the border of the box, to be blue 500. And then we can pass in the props. So we're going to use a spreader here to display any properties that we're passing in to the user. And then we can close this box out. and make sure we put a comma here and hit save. So now we have this like checkbox box that essentially when you click it, it will highlight and show the user the checkbox. So now we really need to work on the checkbox part of things. Now the checkbox part of things has a lot of different pieces going on, including some built-in functionality that we'll talk about as we go along. So what's really great about ChakraUI is it actually can be used to handle certain properties as you're going along. So if you need to know whether or not it's the state and anything like that, maybe the label properties, the input properties, and things like that, we can actually handle all of that via ChakraUI instead of making our own state management, which makes it really easy for us to handle. So what we can do here is say import. We're going to import box again. We're also going to import HStacks, text, use checkbox, and those are all coming from ChakraUI/React. And then we're going to import some icons to make this easier. We're going to use MD checkbox and MD checkbox outline blank. So that gives us like a square box that looks like a checkbox. And those are going to come from React icons. And we're going to use /MD this time. And then we can import our checkbox that we just created. So checkbox box from /checkbox box. Then in our const here, we can do button checkbox and then pass in some props. And then we can create our function here. Now let's talk about what we're going to be doing here. So some of the props that we know that a user needs from the original version is that we need a title, note, and then the value, which will be the value of the ID. So when we connect this to a database or something like that, it will be the ID that we can update. And then anything else that we're passing along, we can use the spreader and say props. So now we have that. We can say, I'd like some built-in functionality from ChakraUI. So underneath you can do const get checkbox props. So that gives us all the properties of a checkbox. We also want the input properties. So all the input properties of our checkbox, we can also get those. We want the label properties, and we also want the state. So we can basically grab whatever we want from our checkboxes, and we can say use checkbox. And then we can use rest for the rest. So any extra properties we pass in, we'll be able to grab. So let's go ahead and wrap this so that we can see it a bit better on screen. So now we have the ability to essentially get any of these different properties without having to do it ourselves. But there's no need for us to handle the state. It's already handled for us. So now we can return and give us some UI elements. So we're going to use HStack, which is a horizontal stack. We're going to add spacing equal to 4. And then we'll get a border here, and we'll give it a border width equal to 2 pixels. We'll give it a px of 4 and a py equal to 3. So px is padding on the x-axis, py padding on the y-axis, and we'll give it a border radius equal to md or medium, which is my favorite type. Then we can do things like this. Label. So we know we want a label. ... get label props. And just like that, now we have all the label props available to us. Then underneath that, we can get an input and say input ... get input props. And now we have access to the input properties. And then we can give it area labeled by, and set that to the value that we've passed in. So we can just say value. And then we can use our handy dandy checkbox that we just created and say checkbox box get checkbox props. And then we give it an ID equal to the value that we're passing in from props. And now at this point, the rest is essentially just state management and design. So we're going to handle everything here without us even doing any work to handle the state. So now we can just add a box and say data checked. So we're asking, is it checked? Well, we can handle that. We can say state dot is checked question mark. Otherwise it's undefined. Undefined. And then inside of our box, we'll give it a font size equal to 2XL. So we get a nice big looking icons, etc. And we can say underscore checked. So when it is checked, we can set the colors. So we'll say, I want the color of the text, which will be the check mark, to be blue. And then when it's not, I want the border color to equal gray 300. And then we can say state dot is checked question mark. And then MD, so we can pass in essentially an icon. So we can say MD checkbox. Or if it's not already done, then we can set MD checkbox outline blank. And I think I spelt this wrong. I did. This should be a capital B. There we go. And then we can close out this. And then we have the checkbox done. Like that's everything that the checkbox could possibly need. So when you look at the screen, there'll be a checkbox there and we can click it. And then underneath the checkbox is where we want everything else to be, like our text, such as the title and what the to-do is. So we can do flex 1, PL equals 2. And then we can say text. And this text is style text. So we can say PL 4. Font weight equal to bold. So we have nice bold text. And we can say title. And then we can copy this to speed it up a little bit and paste it underneath. And we'll just make a few changes to the text itself and say this should be font size. We'll make it small and we'll set this to a note. And then we hit save and everything's done already. So now we have the ability to essentially pass in this checkbox somewhere and it will show up on screen and we can pass in data back and forth. So what we could do now is actually use this to do and create a to-do on this screen so we can see what it looks like. So the easiest way for us to do that is to just take some code and return it on screen. So let's go inside our index here and just delete everything out that isn't needed. And for now, we're going to import this. So we can import button checkbox from // components / checkbox / checkbox. And then we can return a checkbox. So we can say, we'd like to return one button checkbox, please. And the value will be equal to test. We'll set the on change value equal to console.log for now, and we'll just say checked. We'll then do ID equal to test, and let's word wrap this so we can see it a bit better. There we go. ID is equal to test. Let's make sure we close this one out first. And then we also want the title to be text boxes are cool. And maybe our note is course is great. And we close this out. And then we can close this like so and hit save. And we'll see what happens. We say modules not found in our checkbox box. And so let's check that out. And I'm intentionally leaving these in the edit because I want people to understand we all make mistakes. And so if we hit save, now you can actually see what it kind of looks like. It's not perfect, and that's because we have other work to do, but the idea is there, right? It's a text box. It has a little clickable icon. Text boxes are cool. The course is great. So we're kind of getting there. In retrospect, this is not perfect, but it will do. And if we shrink or make it bigger, it doesn't really change too much, but it is still responsive. So let's handle it better. Let's do better, which is always a key element to anything that we do. So all of this is fine and all this is fine, but maybe we could do something in our to-dos here to sort of handle this a bit better. So we can create a file in here called to-dos with an S on the end, and this will be where we handle multiple to-dos. Because we know that somebody's not just going to do one to-do, they could do 100 to-dos, and we don't want to just have to keep doing this. Copy and paste, right? We don't want to do this over and over again, right? We don't want to do that. So what we can do is do to-dos. And what to-dos is going to do is use something called stack, which is similar to the H stack you've seen before, but it doesn't denote which way you're going to stack them. And then we can do ChakraUI/React. And we can say export const to-dos is equal to return. And then stack spacing is equal to 5. And then justify this content because it's a flex element to start. And then inside of here is where we could do more of the, we can do more of these. Something like this, but it doesn't make sense to have this inside of here. It just doesn't make sense. So we can create one more file here called todo.js. And this is where we'll do that work. So we can do all of the things that we have in here. We can just cut this code here and say, I'd like this part, please. So cut. And put it in here. And then we'll word wrap real quick so that I can see. And say import button checkbox from // components / checkbox. Then what we can do is do export const to-do is equal to, for now we'll leave it as one of these and we'll just have a simple return, but we'll fill these in later when we get on to not just using regular UI elements. And we can put a button in here and we can hit save. And now we have this to-dos. And instead of having this, now what we can do is import our to-do from /to-do. And then we can just show them on screen. So for now, we're going to have one. So we can just do this and hit save. And then inside of here, in our index file, we can just have to-dos show up. So instead of having this, we can do import to-dos from /, components /to-do/to-dos, and then we can just import this in our return functionality. So we can just do to-dos /close and hit save, and this should refresh, and nothing will really change for now. Like, it's still the same thing, but we know the element is working still. Everything kind of shows up. So now we really need to do something in this section, right? We need it to be a bit more styled. We need it to be a bit more obvious that this is a main section. We need a heading. We need all those kinds of things. So let's handle that before we move on to anything else. So we can do a box here and say as equals section. So this is a section of our code. py is equal to 12. So we want padding at the top. And everything's going to be wrapped in this. So for now, we can just move this inside of here. And then we need another box. So we'll do another box here. And this box is where all of our styling is going to happen. So we can move this to-dos again inside of this box. Now we have that. Let's import those boxes. So import box. And while we're here, we'll import heading from @ChakraUI /React. And we can say import. And we can get rid of all these for now. Now we have a nice simple idea. Now inside this box section, we can start telling it what we want it to do. So let's do max W is equal to extra large and hit save and see what kind of changes that made. So now you can see this is kind of starting to style itself. Then we can do mx is equal to auto. Hit save. Okay, now we're kind of in the middle. Then we can do width is equal to full. Hit save. And then we can do px is equal to base. So when it's on a base element that's not denoted, it will be 6. And then if it's on a medium-sized screen, we'll ask it to be 8. Then underneath here, we're going to have heading. And the heading is just essentially an H of some nature. We'll set the size to large. We'll add a margin at the bottom equal to 8. And the font weight equal to extra bold. And then we'll call this things you gotta do. And hit save. And now we kind of have something fairly decent. It's set from our checkbox. It seems to be in a weird spot up here, but everything else looks pretty good. So let's look at why this checkbox is here and move it around and see if we can figure out why. So going back to our checkbox box, all of this is perfectly fine. Nothing in here is affecting that, right? So this is all just, hey, we want it to be outlined and this and pointers and when it's checked, it wants to be this color. And when it's not checked, it should be gray, which is everything here. But something in here is causing us to not be able to successfully have it placed in the right spot. So looking at this code, potentially there's something in here that causes that problem. So inside of here, we have an H stack with a spacing of 4. We have a border width of 2 and a PX of 4 and a PY of 3. That all looks pretty fine to me. I think if we change this, it's not going to make too much of a difference. So if I hit save now, as you can see, it just moved this way, which doesn't really help. So let's set that back to 4. And the border radius is just the radius around the box. So that part should be fine. So it should be something in here that's causing this problem, as we are setting all of the box sizes. So if I change anything in here, it should change the size of the box. So now we've looked around. Here's what's causing the problem. This label is covering everything, including this section down here, which shouldn't be the case. So if we take this label here and actually drop it here and hit save, what you should see now is the checkbox is actually aligned correctly. So now we have everything sort of working. It moves around and it's super responsive. Nothing really changes, but when we check it, it's blue and highlighted. And when we uncheck it, it's now gray. So now we have a fully working page that is using checkboxes through ChakraUI. And then we still have a few changes that we need to make this really a functioning application. So things that we need to do. We need ability to add another to-do to our list. So if we want to add a to-do, how do we do that? Then we also need to be able to delete one. We also need a way to show our completed section. And then at that point, we'll be ready to implement all of the other stuff alongside it. So let's work on the more basic version first, which would be to add a to-do. And then we can talk about how we can add maybe a delete box. And then we can talk about how we add completed versions. So in our to-do section here, we're going to add something called Add To-do.js. Now this file is going to handle the way to add another to-do. And what we're going to use here is something called an accordion. Now, if you've never worked with accordions before, the way that they work is they essentially allow a user to click a button and it sort of slides down in a beautiful way to allow a user to add something, and then you can slide it back up to basically keep more space than you actually have on screen. So we're going to be using a box, a button. We're going to use something called inputs, accordion, and then accordion buttons. So accordion button, accordion items, accordion icons, and an accordion panel. And that's going to come from ChakraUI/React. And we're going to export const add to do equal to a function. And we're going to say return. And then we can start building our accordion. So let me just add an accordion first. So accordion, allow toggle. And we'll put a margin on the bottom and the top. We'll set them to 8 and MT equal to 2 respectively. And then we don't really have anything in here. And did I spell accordion wrong? Accordion. That looks right. I can't spell the second time apparently. And if I hit save here, now we can actually add this to our page and we can see it grow as we go along. So let's go to our index page here and say, I want this above our to-dos. So we can do add to-do. And we'll do a slash here. And we'll say, copy this, drop this in here and say add to-do from add to-do. And at that point, we should be able to import this in and hit save. And at the moment, we don't see anything. We don't see anything on screen, but nothing is broken. So let's keep working on our accordions and we'll start seeing the changes as I hit save. So now we have that. And now we need something called an accordion item. And the accordion item is essentially a wrapper around the whole thing that will take things like an accordion button, an accordion panel. It's essentially however many accordion items that you need. We only need one in this scenario. So we can do accordion item. And inside of the accordion item, we're going to have something called box. Oh, actually, we'll do something different here. We're going to do an H2. So just a regular H2 in here. And inside that H2 is where we're going to handle everything else. We can do H2. And then inside of our H2, we can do an accordion button. So we'll take this one and put it in here and say box flex is equal to 1, text align equal to left, because we want it on the left side. and we'll say Add To hit save. And now you can see that we have this kind of like thing. It's toggleable, but it doesn't actually do anything. But we're starting to see the progress here of what it could look like. So now we have that. Before we have the end of our button here, we want to add this accordion icon. Now this is a pre-built icon for us by ChakraUI team that allows you to do this. A little arrow that moves depending on how you toggle it. So now we have that section. Underneath it is where the panel comes down and we see something on the screen. So if we do accordion panel, and then we add the padding on the bottom equal to 4. And then inside of here is we can have our form. So we can just say form. And then inside of the form is where we'll do all our work. So we can do input. And then a placeholder equal to add a new title. And say my equal to 4. And then we close it up. And then if I hit save, now you can see that this is here. And then when I close it, it disappears off the screen and everything shuffles around, which is perfect because now we don't have to worry about using too much space for this form when it's fully expanded. So now we can take another one of these inputs and we can just copy and paste it down here. And we can add we can change this to add, and then add a new note. And then underneath that is where we can have our button. And the button will just be the background equal to blue 500, as that's been kind of our theme. I'll set the color to white. And then the type equal to submit, even though we don't have anything to submit right now. And then we'll say Add To and hit save. Now we have this form here that's completely disappeared. Like, it makes the screen half the size. And we can type in here and hit add, and nothing will really happen. But we have functionality that shows how to add a to-do. What if we want to delete the to-do though? What happens if this one is like, oops, made a mistake. I don't want to complete this. I want to delete it. We can also do something like that. So in our to-dos here, we can do something called delete todo.js. And this delete is just going to be an icon button that we can pass in a value, and we'll just delete it from a database or wherever it's stored. So we can do import box and then something called an icon button, which is also something new that you probably haven't seen. And essentially it's a button that takes in a icon as an option. And we're going to use something called md delete, and that's going to come from React icons/md, and we do export const delete to do, and I'm going to put value in here for now. We're not really going to use this value until later, but it's there and we know that we need to pass it in. In our return functionality, we're going to wrap it in a box, and then we're going to use icon button, and this is just a button that will display an icon on one side. We can say we want the variant equal to outline. We want a border equal to none. So there's no border on this button. Color equal to blue 500. We want an area label for screen readers set to delete. And we want the font size, an important piece. We'll set it to 20 pixels, and we'll also have on-click functionality. For now, we're just going to set this to console.log deleted. But in the future, we'll update this with whatever we need. And then you just need to pass in the icon that we imported. So we do icon, and then md delete, and then we close this out and hit save. Then we can use this somewhere in our to-dos to handle when we have a delete. So we can do that now. And then the only thing left after we add this to-do to our to-do box is just completed to-dos, which we can show people in a form of a table that will be used and also be flexible enough to shrink down to something of a decent size. So let's add this MD delete and then we'll move on to that. So where we want to add this delete functionality is in our checkbox.js here, underneath our text, but before the end of the H stack is where we want to delete it. So we can just add delete to do, and then we can put an ID in here for now, and we'll set it to a value. And then up here, we'll just import that, which will be import delete to do from ... to do / delete to do, and hit save. And now we have a little delete icon. Doesn't do anything right now, but the functionality is there. So now we have one more tiny piece, and then this whole thing is complete. We got everything that you need to have a UI ready to use this however you want. If you're continuing on with the course, that's using 2 elements of Hazura and Clerk, but you could use this with Supabase, you could use this with nhost, you could use this with Firebase, you can use it with whatever you want. So the completed to-do section is the final section that we need. And the way completed to-dos are going to work is we're going to take in some sort of element, and we're essentially just going to return that back to the user in a table. So we're going to create one more to-do here. I'm going to call it completed todos.js. And then we're going to import table pieces from our ChakraUI functionality. So we need to import the following things from ChakraUI. Table, tbody, td, th, thead, tr, box, and heading. And that's going to come from at ChakraUI React, which I'm sure you're bored of me saying over and over again. Now we're going to do an export const completed to-dos equal to currently an empty function. Then we're going to do a return. And inside of this return is where we're going to handle everything. So tables are notoriously tricky. They involve some pieces that people don't really like, such as what do you do when it goes to mobile? Like, how do you handle a table? So the way we're going to handle the table is we're going to say if it's on a mobile device, we're just going to allow the user to scroll left to right because there's no real good way to do that. So we're going to add a box at the top and we're going to call this section. And then we're going to add py equal to 12. And then we're going to hit save. And then we're going to create a new page here. And the new page is going to be called completed.js. And this is where our completed to-dos are going to go. So it's important for us to be able to see what's happening at the same time. So we're going to import completed to-dos from ... component / to-do / completed to-dos. And then we can just do export default function completed return completed to-dos, and then we close it out. And now if we navigate to that page, so we just say completed, we should get an empty screen. which is perfectly fine because we don't really have anything in here. But now we can start working on making this look good. So let's add another box here. And this box is going to handle all of the sort of stylings between mobile and desktop as I've previously done. So we're going to do a box here with a max W, so max width on base is going to be extra large, but on a medium screen, we're going to set it to 7XL. So on most cases, it's going to be small. Anything bigger, it will be that. Then we need a comma here, and then we want it to be in the center. So MX is equal to auto. PX is equal to base, and then a 6. And then MD is equal to 8. And that will give us most of our functionality here. And then we need a comma here to make sure that that closes out. Then we need to handle overflow, right? So overflow on the x-axis only. So we're going to do box here and say overflow x is equal to auto. And that will automatically handle what happens when there's overflow. Then we need a heading. So we'll do heading size is equal large. And we'll set a margin on the bottom equal to 6 so that we have a little bit of a margin. And inside we'll say things you have done and hit save. All right, good start. We have a heading. Now we actually need the table data. So underneath our heading, we can do table. And we can say my, so margin on the y-axis is equal to 8. We want a border width equal to a single pixel and a font size equal to small. Now we've hit save. You don't really see anything on the screen yet, but as we fill it out, so we'll do a T head. BG is equal to gray.50. Hit save. Maybe there's something there, maybe there's not. Let's see if we continue on. We'll do a TR. And we'll do a TH. And this is a heading. And we'll do white space equal to no wrap. Scope equals a column. And we'll give it the name title. And we'll hit save. And now we have a title. Good start. Then we can take this and we'll do 2 more. And we'll do note. Hit save. And then we'll hit this one with completed at and hit save. So now we kind of have what is the beginning of a very basic table that we can handle everything with. So underneath the T head is where you put your T body. So table body. And inside of here, we're going to have TRs, which are rows. We need a key for each row. So for now, we'll just set this to ID. And this will make it easier when we go through the rest of the course. And we'll do a TD this course. So that's what we've completed. And then we need a note. And then we need a date. So we'll do, let's just say, you finally finished. And we'll put it today's date, which is 08/06/2021. Hit save. And now we have a table with data in it that will slowly shrink to a point where we get a scroll bar, and then vice versa. When we get to this size, it gets no bigger than it is. So that's perfect for what we want. And we can hit save here, and we can hit save here, and then our completed to-dos is done as well. So now we have this home page that has this, we have the completed section, but our heading is missing the completed section. So let's finally finish this part of the course by adding that in. So if we go to our layout section and go to nav items, if you remember, in our nav, originally, we only had one version. So in the nav menu, we only have this href for home. So now we can just copy this down. And for mobile, we'll set this to completed. And then we'll do /completed, because that's what we called it. And then down here, we actually need an icon to go with it. So if we go into our icons at the top, we can add another one here to handle that kind of stuff. So in our menu, we'll do something, I don't know, maybe hi mail, which is like a an icon for like an inbox. We'll do hi mail here. And we'll call this label completed. And then we'll set this to completed. And hit save. Now we have the option here. And if we stretch the page, we now have this, which we can click on. And it brings us right there using the router pushed. So everything is done now. And the next section is something I'm going to talk about now. Wow. What a course. So we just spent the last couple of hours building out this gorgeous UI that you can extend and use with all different kinds of databases to make it work really well. So we've done that now, and now we need to move on to the next section of the course. So if you're ready to move on, click in the playlist to the next section, which is adding Hazura and Clerk to this course.